It dawned on me this year that Good Friday comes every year. I don't mean the date on the liturgical calendar, and I don't mean a worship service. I mean, every year it seems that somewhere as Easter approaches, I find myself at the cross of Christ. Sometimes it's the death of a family member. Sometimes it's a death of a member of my congregation. Sometimes it's a natural disaster or an act of terror or a global crisis. But somehow, as we approach Easter, I realize that I always find myself at the foot of the crucified Lord. And this year, Good Friday came in the shooting death of Stefan Clark. Friday, during our South Sacramento Interfaith Partnership worship service, our host pastor noted that we were together in worship on the heels of the burial of yet another young African American man, unarmed, shot and killed by police. And as he noted that, suddenly one of the other pastors shouted out, "Say his name!" And we all said, "Stefan Clark." It was a powerful moment. His death awakens a full spectrum of human responses. Relived trauma, white-hot anger, deep sorrow, despair, all the way to the other side, pity. And even in the demonstrations, we hear that recurring voice. What do those people want anyway? Right? This Good Friday brings lots of questions to the foot of the cross, such as why are African American men 6% of our population, and yet they represent more than 30% of all those unarmed who are shot and killed by police officers? We need to ask questions. We need to ask, why are police shootings rising every year? We need to ask, what should be law enforcement protocols when pursuing someone suspected of a misdemeanor? These are not questions we can answer on our own. They must be answered together as a community of people pursuing justice and the health of our communities. We need to ask, why has there been a definitive shift in the training of law enforcement officers from community protection to military assault style training? We need to ask one another. We need to work together with law enforcement. There are many other questions that need to be asked, like, why on earth would a young father of two find breaking into car windows worthwhile? What was he really looking for in this land of opportunity? What was he not finding elsewhere? We need to ask questions like that. We need to ask, what is it that keeps young men unemployed? There are larger questions being asked. I hear African Americans in our nation asking, where's our hope for a nation finally cleansed of its 400-year explicit and implicit bias against dark skin? Where's our hope? Where's our hope? Good Friday came to the students of Marjorie Stoneman High School this year It came to all of them, and they brought their grief to our streets and to our nation's capital and many other cities. But did you hear the way some on the far right created vicious lies with photoshopping about the student leaders, young people? Did you hear? Did you see those? I almost hope you didn't. I was appalled. Who are those people? They're somebody's family members. They're somebody's children, fathers and mothers perhaps. They're somebody's co-workers. They're somebody's friends. We know they are our neighbors. When race, power, and privilege collude together as an overt government policy, we usually end up with genocide. And this year, Good Friday came to the Rohingya Muslims of Myanmar. You know, you remember that after 6 million Jews and homosexuals and artists and many other people were murdered at the hands of Nazis, that the world said, never again. Well, since then we've seen the Khmer Rouge kill almost 1/4 of the population of Cambodians and all of the Vietnamese who were living in their borders. And then we saw the Hutu government give license to the murder and slaughter of Tutsis in Rwanda. And then in the city of Srebrenica, we saw 8,000 Muslim men and boys killed in 10 days. So, where is our hope for never again? On April 4th, 1968, some of you remember the date, right here and maybe right here. We all came to Good Friday together. And Good Friday came to us on the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel on Mulberry Street in Memphis, Tennessee, with one shot by a cowardly, bigoted sniper. But before that shot, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and so many others, he did not march alone, so many others had thrown themselves into the breach between we hold these truths to be self-evident, that what?
All men are created.
Yeah, self-evident. And the reality, the harsh and ugly reality of a segregated nation. They threw themselves into that chasm. It's interesting that in that year, which turned out to be his last, Dr. King had a question of his own, a new question that he was asking. Perhaps the most important question he could be asking the other leaders of the civil rights movement at that time, particularly after there had been some significant victories over Jim Crow laws. Very vital question he started to raise. Vital because we know that passing laws doesn't change hearts, does it? 50 years later, we have proved that. A very important question, and a very simple question. In one of his speeches, he began to raise it and then repeated it over and over again. Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? If you have been burdened through these holy weeks by what we are seeing and hearing and experiencing together, and you woke up this morning with that question in your heart, where's hope? Let me share with you, that's my hope. I find my Easter hope in his question. You know why? Because it calls us to continue with our baptismal mission to resist evil and injustice in whatever forms they present themselves. And it calls us not to give up. It calls us to recognize that we are in an eternal struggle and we have an eternal resource for it called love. And above all, that question trusts that there is a someone who has a place where we all belong together. That question trusts that eternal truth. That is my hope. Where do we go from here? Because there's somewhere to go. That's my Easter hope. That we will go together. And so we need to answer that question because there's only one faithful way to answer it, and that is to follow Jesus. My Easter hope is that everyone who takes on the hard questions of our time and shoulders them as our own cross to bear and moves forward into God's future. That's my Easter hope. So, Centennial, we need to answer the question, where do we go from here? How will we leave this privileged space together and go out to those spaces where people are hurting and weeping and shaking with rage? How will we leave these four walls and go out with God's indestructible power of love to become the hope our neighbors are longing for? How will we do that together? Let me invite you to pray. We have 50 days to Pentecost. Pray every single day for God's answer to that question for us. Where do we go, literally go from here? Where are we called to go, Centennial? To find those spaces of human need. Let's answer those questions together. How will we become the hope our neighbors long for? And as we pray for that, let me invite you to be generous this day, as we know there are many families who need shelter and who need hope on this morning. Share yours with them in your offering.